For ending unsupervised visits after my mom secretly brought my sister to see my daughter? I'm Abigail, 39, and for most of my adult life, I've been the person in my family who smooths things over before anyone has to admit they crossed a line. My husband Jonah has watched me do that for years, especially with my mother Elaine and my younger sister Jenna. I used to tell myself that being the reasonable one meant not reacting to every comment, not turning disagreements into ultimatums, and letting people cool off instead of demanding immediate apologies. Sometimes that really was the better choice. Other times I can see now it just taught certain people that if they waited long enough I would absorb the discomfort and call it peace. Sophie's birthday dinner was supposed to be simple. My parents were hosting because Sophie liked my dad's grilled chicken, and my mom had insisted on making the chocolate cake Sophie had requested since she was little. It was supposed to be me, Jonah, Sophie, my parents, and nobody else. I had specifically asked because family gatherings had been awkward for the previous 18 months, and Sophie had already told me she didn't want her birthday to become one of those family things. My mother said she understood. For the first 40 minutes, everything was normal. Sophie opened a card from my dad. Jonah teased her about being old enough to start correcting our driving. My mother fussed over candles she couldn't get to stand straight in the cake. Then the doorbell rang. My mom didn't look surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and walked to the front door while my father suddenly became very interested in cutting another piece of chicken. I heard the door open, then Jenna's voice. "Hey." Just one word, but I knew it immediately. I hadn't spoken to my sister in 18 months. When I looked at my mother, she wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't even pretending this was unexpected. She stepped aside so Jenna could come in, and when I said, "Mom, what is this?" she gave me the expression she usually reserved for situations where she thought I was being needlessly difficult. "We're done letting you punish this family," she said. Jenna was holding a gift bag. Sophie went completely still beside me. I could feel Jonah looking at me, waiting to see what I wanted to do. He didn't jump in. That mattered. If he had, my mother would have instantly twisted it into Jonah controlling me or making things worse. I asked my mother one question. "Did you invite her?" "She is Sophie's aunt." "That's not what I asked." My mother exhaled. "Yes," Jenna said. "Can we not do this tonight? I came for Sophie." I remember thinking that was exactly the problem. Everyone was always doing things for Sophie, that Sophie then had to carry. I stood up and reached for my coat. My mother stared at me. "You're seriously leaving? I'm not doing this here. This is her birthday." "I know." I turned to Sophie. "Get your things, please." Her face had gone red. For a second I thought she was going to refuse. She looked at Jenna, then at my mom, then back at me. And then she leaned toward me and whispered, "Mom, this isn't the first time Grandma brought her around." Everything in me seemed to go quiet. I didn't ask what she meant. Not there. I just said, "Okay, get your jacket." My father finally spoke. "Abby, maybe everybody could just sit down." "No." He nodded once and looked away. That was the entire birthday confrontation. No screaming. No smashed cake. No dramatic speech. We left. The drive home was where the real story started. For the first few minutes nobody said anything. Sophie sat in the back seat with the gift bag from my parents at her feet. Jonah drove because I knew I was too angry to be careful. I could see Sophie in the rearview mirror, picking at the corner of a birthday card envelope. My first instinct was to ask, "Why didn't you tell me?" The question was already in my mouth. Then I stopped. Because whatever Sophie had done, she was 16, and the adults in this situation were my mother and my sister. So instead I asked, "Did you feel like you could tell me?" Sophie looked up. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, Kind of. Kind of. Grandma said it would just start the whole fight again." Jonah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I kept my voice as level as I could. "How many times have you seen Jenna?" "I don't know." "Sophie?" "I really don't know exactly. Like a bunch." "A bunch means what?" She stared out the window. "Maybe 7 or 8. I don't know. Sometimes she was just there for like 20 minutes. I turned around in my seat. 7 or 8 times? "Mom, I said I don't know." "Okay. You're right. I'm sorry. She looked surprised that I backed off. I asked, where? Grandma's. Sometimes coffee. Once when Grandma took me to that craft store. Jenna met us there. Jonah asked, did Grandma tell you ahead of time? Sometimes. And sometimes Jenna just happened to be there? I asked. Sophie gave a small shrug that told me she now understood those coincidences probably weren't coincidences. What did Grandma say about telling us? She didn't say to lie. That sentence hit me harder than if Sophie had said my mother told her to lie. What did she say? She said I don't have to tell you everything, and that if I mentioned Jenna, you'd make it into a whole thing and then nobody could see anybody. She said keeping something private isn't the same as lying. I looked forward again. That was so exactly my mother's style that I could hear her saying it. Not lie to your mom. Just don't bring it up. There's no reason to upset her. You know how she gets. You're old enough to have your own relationships. We don't need to make everything a confrontation. Sophie said quieter. At first I didn't think it was a huge deal. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I get that. I wanted to see Aunt Jenna. I know. That was true and it mattered. Jenna had been Sophie's favorite aunt for years. She remembered school concerts. She showed up with snacks when Sophie had exams. She could make Sophie laugh in a way that was irritatingly effortless. Before everything blew up, I trusted Jenna with Sophie completely. Which was why what happened 18 months earlier had hurt as much as it did. Sophie had been 14, close to 15, and we had an argument about a weekend plan. She wanted to go with friends to a gathering where there wasn't going to be a parent home for most of the night. Jonah and I said no. Sophie thought our answer was ridiculous. I thought her response was dramatic. We argued. Not our best parenting moment, but not a catastrophe either. She told me I never trusted her. I told her she was proving why I needed to know where she was, and she stomped out of the house saying she needed air. There was a coffee shop within walking distance, and that was where she went. I knew that because about 15 minutes later she texted me, I'm at the coffee place. I need space. I replied, okay, come home by 6. Then about 20 minutes after that, I checked her location and saw it moving. I called. No answer. I texted. Nothing. Jonah called. Nothing. At first I thought maybe she was on a friend's ride home. Then the location kept moving away from our neighborhood. We called again. Still nothing. I sent, Sophie, answer now. We need to know where you are. No response. That was the point where annoyance turned into panic. Almost 2 hours after she had left the house, I got a text from Jenna. Sophie's with me. She's safe. Everybody needed time to cool off. I called her immediately. She answered sounding irritated, as if I were interrupting something. Where are you? We're getting food. You picked up my daughter without telling me? She called me upset. Then you call me. Abby, she didn't want to talk to you. That doesn't mean you take her somewhere and let us think she's missing. She's not missing. She's with family. I remember standing in my kitchen with Jonah beside me, both of us staring at the phone like it had become something dangerous. I asked to speak to Sophie. Jenna said, she's still upset. I didn't ask if she was upset. Put her on. Sophie came on and said she was fine. I told Jenna to bring her home. She did about 30 minutes later. The conversation afterward was ugly, but not because I screamed. I think Jenna was almost more offended that I stayed controlled. I told her taking Sophie without telling either parent was unacceptable. I told her encouraging Sophie to ignore our calls was worse. Jenna folded her arms and said, she needed an adult who would actually listen instead of just enforcing rules. I said, you could have listened at the coffee shop. You could have called me. You could have texted before driving away with her. You're acting like I kidnapped her. I didn't say that. You don't have to. That's what you're implying. No. I'm saying you're not Sophie's parent. That was the line she could not tolerate. For Jenna, being the fun aunt had always come with a quiet belief that she understood Sophie better than I did. Most of the time I had found it harmless, even useful. Every teenager needs adults they can talk to who aren't their parents. But there's a difference between being a safe adult and positioning yourself as the adult a teenager can use to bypass her parents. I did not cut Jenna off that night. I asked for an apology, a real one. I also said that for a while, Jenna would not have private contact with Sophie. If she wanted to see or speak to her, it would be through me or Jonah until we trusted that she understood the line she had crossed. Jenna said, "I'm sorry you got scared." I said, "That's not an apology." She replied, "I'm not apologizing for being there for her." We went in circles for another 10 minutes before I ended the conversation. A week later, Sophie showed me a message Jenna had sent her directly. "You can always call me if things get intense at home. I mean that." Sophie had not hidden that message from me. She actually showed it to me because even she could tell it went against our agreement. That was when I cut direct contact with Jenna. I told her not to message Sophie privately anymore, and that I would not be communicating with her unless she was willing to address what happened without turning it into a debate about whether I was too controlling. Jenna replied that I was isolating Sophie from anyone who disagreed with me. I didn't answer. My mother, of course, had opinions. Elaine is the sort of person who thinks family conflict is a temporary illness she can treat by putting everybody in the same room often enough. She called me 2 days after I stopped speaking to Jenna. "You two need to fix this. Jenna knows what she needs to do." "No, she knows what you want her to say." "Mom, she took Sophie without telling us and told her not to answer. Sophie was safe." "That isn't the point." "It's a big part of the point." I ended up saying something I should have said much earlier. "You don't have to agree with me. You do have to respect that this is our decision as Sophie's parents." My mother went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And what does that mean for me?" "Nothing if you stay out of it." She wanted Sophie to keep spending Fridays with her and Dad. It had become a routine. Elaine would pick her up after school or after practice. They'd get food, run errands, watch some ridiculous baking competition, and Jonah or I would pick Sophie up later. Sophie loved those Fridays. I wanted her to keep them, so I made the condition painfully clear. You cannot arrange contact between Sophie and Jenna. You cannot pass messages. You cannot use your time with Sophie to talk about why I'm wrong, or put her in the middle of this. My mother said, "I don't agree with you, but I won't get in the middle." I believed her. That is the part one feels stupid about now. Not because there were no signs. There were. I just had an explanation ready for every one of them. About 5 months before Sophie's birthday, she came home from my parents' house and mentioned that Jenna's dog was finally doing better after surgery. I paused. "How did you know the dog had surgery?" Sophie said, "Grandma told me." Perfectly plausible. A few weeks later, my mother started asking oddly specific questions about Sophie's schedule. "What time does practice end Thursday? Is Jonah picking her up Friday, or are you? Does she still go to that coffee place after school?" She framed everything as planning grandmother-granddaughter time. I didn't think much of it. Then during a family dinner, my mother said, "Jenna said Sophie shouldn't worry so much about the driving test." I looked at her. "Jenna knows about Sophie's driving test?" My mother blinked once. "I probably told her." Again plausible. Another time I made a neutral comment that Jenna had always hated cold weather, and Sophie got strangely tense. "Can we not talk about her?" I assumed she was tired of the family conflict. Looking back, she was trying not to say the wrong thing. And my mother kept repeating the same phrase whenever Jenna came up. Kids should be allowed to love everybody. I always answered some version of, "I never said Sophie wasn't allowed to love Jenna." I thought we were having a philosophical disagreement. I didn't realize my mother was using that philosophy as permission. After the birthday dinner, when we got home, none of us took off our shoes right away. We just ended up in the kitchen. Sophie's cake was still at my parents' house. Her gifts from us were in the living room. There should have been music on or photos or her complaining about me taking too many pictures. Instead, the three of us sat around the table trying to figure out what had been happening for 5 months. I told Sophie first, "You're not in trouble." She looked at me carefully. "I'm serious. I need you to tell me what happened. I don't need you to defend Grandma or Jenna, and I don't need you to defend me." Jonah added, "And if you wanted to see Jenna, you can say that." Sophie looked down at her hands. "I did." I said, "Okay. I missed her." "I know. And when Grandma said she might stop by one time, I thought it was just one time. Okay. Then it kept happening. Did Jenna ask you to keep it secret too? Not really at first. At first. Sophie hesitated. She would say stuff like, "Your mom doesn't need to know every conversation you have." Jonah closed his eyes for a second. Sophie continued, "And Grandma would say if you found out, you'd stop Fridays." That one landed. Because it meant my mother knew exactly what she was risking and had made Sophie responsible for protecting it. Sophie said, "I didn't want Fridays to stop." I reached across the table. "I understand. I know it sounds bad. It sounds like you were trying to keep something you cared about." She nodded. Then she said, "It got weird." "How?" "Because I had to remember stuff." "What stuff?" "Like what I wasn't supposed to mention. Jenna would tell me about things, and then if I talked to you I had to think, wait, can I say that? And sometimes Grandma would remind me before I left, like, no need to bring up today." She pulled out her phone. "I have one." I didn't ask to see her messages. She opened them herself and put the phone on the table. It was a short exchange with my mother from about 6 weeks earlier. "Elaine, Jenna might stop by for a little bit. I know you miss her." "Sophie, is Mom gonna know?" "Elaine, no need to bring this up with your mom tonight. She'll make it into a bigger thing than it is." That was it. No secret group chat. No folder full of evidence. Just one ordinary text from my mother telling my daughter that I did not need to know something she knew I had explicitly prohibited. I took a photo of the exchange only because Sophie said, "You should keep it in case Grandma says she never said that." Then Sophie asked, "Are you mad at me?" I hated that question. "Yes," I said carefully. "I'm upset that you kept this from us. But I'm much more upset that adults told you keeping it from us was the mature thing to do." She looked relieved and guilty at the same time. Jonah said, "You can want a relationship with Jenna and still recognize that this was handled badly." Sophie nodded. I wish I could say I immediately knew exactly what to do. I didn't. Part of me wanted to call my mother right then and demand to know what she had been thinking. Another part of me wanted to pretend there was some version of this that was less deliberate than it looked. That second instinct was familiar. It was the one that always said, maybe there's a misunderstanding, maybe intentions matter, maybe one conversation can put everything back where it was. Jonah knew that look on my face. He said, "Your mom isn't confused about the rule." I didn't answer. He continued, "She just thinks she gets to overrule it." I snapped, "I know." He let that sit. Then he said, "Okay. My mother texted before we went to bed. You ruined Sophie's birthday by making a scene and leaving. Jenna came because she loves her. Nobody was going to argue until you decided to." I stared at the message for a while. Then I replied with one sentence. "How long has Jenna been seeing Sophie when she's with you?" It took my mother 11 minutes to answer. "Jenna has stopped by once or twice. You're making it sound like we were running some kind of operation." I wrote, "Once or twice." She replied, "I don't keep a calendar." Sophie was happy to see her. Maybe that should tell you something. I stopped answering. The next morning Jenna emailed me. I had blocked her number, but not her email because there had been practical family things over the previous year where I thought she might need a way to reach me. The subject line was, "You need to stop doing this to Sophie." I almost deleted it. Instead I read it once. Jenna accused me of turning Sophie's birthday into a punishment. She said I cared more about being obeyed than about what Sophie actually wanted. She wrote that our mother had been the only adult willing to respect Sophie's right to have her aunt in her life. Then she wrote, "If you'd paid attention instead of trying to control everything, you would have known the situation had been changing for months." Months. That one word mattered. Jenna had meant it as proof that I was out of touch with my own daughter. Instead, it confirmed that the birthday dinner had not been a spontaneous peace offering. My mother and Jenna had been coordinating contact over time. I forwarded the email to Jonah and saved it. I didn't reply. That afternoon my father called. "Your mom's upset," he said. I almost laughed. "So am I." "I know. I just think everybody needs to calm down." Dad, did you know Jenna had been seeing Sophie? A long pause. I saw her there a couple times. I closed my eyes. You saw Jenna at your house with Sophie? Twice that I remember. And you didn't tell me. I thought you knew. That answer was so obviously incomplete that for once I didn't help him out of it. I just waited. He sighed. Your mother said you didn't need every detail. What does that mean? She said it would just start another argument. So you didn't think I knew. I didn't know what you knew. Dad. He went quiet again. Finally he said, no, I guess I didn't think you knew. And you decided not to ask. I didn't want to make things worse. That was my father's entire role in the family in one sentence. He didn't like conflict. He didn't like choosing sides. He especially didn't like confronting my mother when she had decided something was best for everyone. But neutrality is not always neutral. Sometimes it just means the person willing to cross the line gets less resistance than the person objecting to it. I asked, did you know Mom was arranging it? No, I swear. I thought Jenna came by. Your mom said it wasn't a big deal. Did you ever wonder why Jenna happened to be there when Sophie was there? He didn't answer. That told me enough. After I got off the phone, Jonah and I sat down with the school portal and our emergency contact information. My mother had legitimate pickup permission because of those Fridays. She was also listed as an emergency contact. We removed her pickup authorization. We changed the emergency list so my father remained available, but my mother could not pick Sophie up without us specifically approving it. Then I texted both of my parents. For now, there will be no unsupervised visits with Sophie. She can call and text you. We are not ending contact. We are changing access because the access we gave you was used to arrange secret contact with Jenna. We can talk after everyone has had a few days. My mother called immediately. I didn't answer. Then she texted. You are punishing your daughter because you can't control your sister. I didn't respond. The hardest conversation wasn't with my mother. It was with Sophie. Friday came 4 days later. Around the time my mother normally would have picked her up, Sophie wandered into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator without taking anything out. I said, you okay? She shrugged. You're allowed to be mad. I'm not mad. Okay. She shut the refrigerator. Then she said, I know Grandma shouldn't have told me to hide it, but I'm still the one losing Fridays. There was no clever answer to that. She was right. I had made a boundary because adults had broken trust, and one consequence was that my daughter lost a routine she loved. I know, I said. It's not like I did it. I know. So it kind of feels like I'm being punished. I can see why. She looked at me, clearly waiting for me to explain why she shouldn't feel that way. I didn't. I said, it is unfair to you. I'm sorry the adults made it unfair. She looked away. Then she said, can I still call Grandma? Yes. Can I text her? Yes. Can I see Grandpa? We're figuring out what that looks like. She nodded. It wasn't a satisfying moment. She didn't hug me. She didn't tell me she understood. She went upstairs. That was the price of the boundary, and I had to sit with it. A few days later my aunt called. She and my mother talk regularly, so I knew some version of the story was going to reach her. She started carefully. I don't want to get involved. Then don't. She sighed. Your mom says you cut off both grandparents because Jenna showed up at Sophie's birthday. I said, that's not what happened. I figured there was more. At first, I told her I didn't want to discuss it. Then she said, Elaine says Sophie begged to see Jenna and you've been punishing her for it. That changed things. Not because I needed my aunt on my side. Because my mother was now using Sophie's supposed wishes as justification for her own choices. So I told my aunt the basic sequence. Jenna had taken Sophie after an argument and encouraged her not to answer us. I had set a temporary boundary. Jenna broke it. My mother had explicitly agreed not to facilitate contact. Months later, we learned she had been arranging repeated visits and telling Sophie not to mention them. My aunt was quiet. Then she said, I don't think Elaine thinks of it as lying. I know. That was almost the whole problem. My aunt said, she thinks you're too rigid. She can think that. You don't care. I care. I'm just not going to debate whether she had to agree with me in order to keep her word. My aunt didn't completely take my side. She said she thought cutting Jenna off had probably made things worse. She said 16 was old enough for Sophie to have opinions about who she saw. I told her I agreed with both statements more than she probably expected. Maybe I had become rigid with Jenna after that second message. Maybe family counseling or a structured conversation could have worked if Jenna had been willing. Maybe I had drawn the line too sharply because I was still furious about those 2 hours when I didn't know where Sophie was. But none of that made my mother's deception acceptable. That night I texted Elaine. I am not going to call relatives and argue my case. But if you tell people Sophie begged you to arrange secret contact or that I cut you off over one dinner, I will correct the facts when I'm asked. Do not use Sophie as your justification. She didn't answer. 2 days later, Sophie asked if we could talk. We sat in her room, which always made me feel like a guest because teenagers have a way of turning the same bedroom they've had since childhood into private territory overnight. She said, "There's something else." I waited. I did want to see Jenna. I know. No, like I asked Grandma about her at first. Okay. I said I missed her. Okay. Sophie looked frustrated. Can you stop saying okay like you're waiting for the bad part? I almost smiled. Fair. Go ahead. She took a breath. At first it was nice. Jenna acted normal. We talked about school and stuff. Then she started asking what you said about her. What kind of things? Like if you still called her irresponsible, or if Dad hated her, or if you ever said I wasn't allowed to talk about her. Did you answer? Sometimes. Okay. She gave me a look. Sorry. Continue. And Grandma would say Jenna was just hurt because you were making her feel like a stranger. Then before I'd come home, Grandma would say things like, "Let's not bring this up tonight." How did that make you feel? Like I was doing something wrong even when everybody kept saying I wasn't. That sentence stayed with me. Sophie said, "I like seeing Jenna. I just didn't like being part of this thing." What thing? Like proving you wrong. There it was. My mother thought repeated contact would show me that Sophie still loved Jenna. As if Sophie's affection for Jenna disproved the boundary. But I had never believed Sophie stopped loving her. The problem was that all three of them had turned that love into an argument. I told Sophie, "You caring about Jenna is not disloyal to me." She looked skeptical. "I'm serious. You can miss her. You can be angry at me. You can think I handled parts of this badly. What you can't be asked to do is carry messages, hide meetings, or report what I say at home. Are you saying I can't ever talk to her again? For now, I'm saying Jenna and I are still not in a place where private contact makes sense. You're 16. As you get older, that decision is going to become more yours. But secrecy is not going to be the price of any relationship." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "I don't really want to talk to her right now anyway." That surprised me. Why? Because she keeps asking about you. I didn't push. About a week later, my father asked if we could meet in person. He said my mother wanted to talk. Then he added, "She thinks Jenna should be there so everybody can settle this." No. Abby. No. This meeting is about what you and Mom did with your access to Sophie. Jenna is part of it. She is, but I'm not sitting down for a forced reconciliation. He hesitated. Your mother thinks that's the only way forward. Then she doesn't understand what we're discussing. That was a small moment, but it felt different for me. Normally, I would have spent 15 minutes explaining why including Jenna would make the meeting harder, then offered compromises until the original boundary barely existed. This time I didn't. My father said he'd talk to my mother. 3 days later, they came to our house without Jenna. Sophie went out with Jonah. That was deliberate. I wasn't going to have her sitting upstairs wondering if she was about to be called down as evidence. My mother started with, "I am sorry the birthday dinner was handled badly." I said, "That's not what I asked to talk about." Her mouth tightened. "I know you were embarrassed." I wasn't embarrassed. You left. I left because you brought Jenna into Sophie's birthday after telling me it would be immediate family. I said I'm sorry for that. Did you arrange for Jenna to see Sophie before that night? My mother looked at my father, then back at me. She stopped by. Did you arrange it? Not every time. How many times? I don't know, Abigail. Sophie remembers 7 or 8. Some of those were 20 minutes. I almost laughed, but I didn't. So yes. My mother leaned back. This is exactly what I mean. You make everything sound sinister. I'm asking whether you arranged contact. I knew Sophie missed her aunt. That's not an answer. My father shifted in his chair. My mother said, fine. Sometimes I knew Jenna was coming. Did you tell Sophie not to tell me? No. I pulled out my phone, but I didn't even open the screenshot. I saw your text. I never told her to lie. I didn't ask whether you used the word lie. My mother looked angry then. Because I didn't. I told her there was no reason to bring up every little thing when I knew you would overreact. My father said quietly, Elaine. She turned toward him. What? He looked uncomfortable. Then he said, you told me the same thing. My mother stared at him. He continued, you said Abby didn't need every detail because it would start another fight. Richard, don't do this. I'm not doing anything. You're taking her side. He shook his head. No. I'm telling her what you told me. My mother's face changed, not dramatically, just enough that I could see she knew the safer version of the story was gone. I said, you put Sophie in the same position. You made her responsible for managing my reaction so you could keep doing something you knew I'd said no to. She wanted to see Jenna. I know. Then why does that not matter to you? It matters. It does not give you permission to secretly arrange it. She's 16, not 6. Then you should have been even more careful not to make her carry adult secrets. My mother pushed back from the table slightly. I was trying to keep everyone from hating each other. I don't hate Jenna. You cut her out of your life. After she ignored the boundary I set. Because she thought the boundary was wrong. She was allowed to think it was wrong. My mother made a frustrated sound. I continued, you were allowed to think it was wrong too. What neither of you were allowed to do was use Sophie to work around us. My father rubbed his forehead. My mother said, you would never have agreed. The room got very quiet, but not in some dramatic movie way. It was just the first direct answer she'd given all afternoon. I said, exactly. She frowned. What? You hid it because you knew I would say no. Because your no was unreasonable. That doesn't change what you did. My father looked at my mother. We could have disagreed with her out loud, he said. We didn't need Sophie to carry it for us. My mother snapped. You saw Jenna there too. I know. And you said nothing. I know. So don't sit there pretending you're different. I'm not. That seemed to stop her more than if he'd defended himself. I asked my mother, did you tell Jenna that if Sophie kept seeing her, eventually I'd have to get over it? My mother looked away. That detail had come from Jenna's email after I reread it more carefully. She had written, Mom was right that once you saw Sophie was fine, you couldn't keep pretending this was necessary forever. I hadn't mentioned it before. My mother said, I said eventually you would see that nobody was hurting Sophie. You decided repeated secret contact would make my boundary impossible to maintain. I thought you would calm down. 18 months later? You hold grudges. Maybe I do. That was part of what made the entire thing morally messy. I told her, maybe I made mistakes with Jenna. Maybe I was too rigid after the second message. But you don't get to secretly correct my parenting because you think I'm wrong. My mother said, so what now? You take my granddaughter away from me. I'm not taking away a relationship. I'm changing the access you used to go around us. Her face crumpled for just a second before she got control of it. You know how much Fridays mean to me. They mean a lot to Sophie too. So you're hurting her to punish me. No. I'm stopping unsupervised visits because unsupervised visits are how this happened. She shook her head. You'll justify anything. I let that go. Then I laid out the boundary. No unsupervised visits with my mother for now. No contact with Jenna arranged through my parents. No messages passed through Sophie. No questions to Sophie about what I said, what Jonah said, whether we were softening, or what Jenna needed to do. If my mother wanted to discuss me, she could call me. If she wanted to discuss Jenna, she could call me. Sophie was not the route. My father asked, "What about me?" I looked at him. He hadn't planned the meetings, but he had seen enough to know something was off and decided silence was easier. "I don't know yet," I said. He nodded slowly. That answer hurt him. I could see it. And I didn't rush to fix it. My mother stood up first. "I hope you're happy." "I'm not." She looked surprised. "This isn't what I wanted. Could have fooled me." She left. My father followed, but at the door he paused. "I'm sorry, Abby," I said. "I know you're sorry, it's bad." He winced. I didn't say anything else. For several weeks he didn't call me. Sophie still texted both grandparents. I didn't monitor her messages. We had one rule. If either grandparent started asking her to carry messages or keep secrets, she was to tell us. Not because she was responsible for enforcing the boundary, but because we couldn't help if we didn't know. My mother sent me several long texts during those weeks. Most of them were variations on the same argument. She loved Sophie. She loved Jenna. She believed families should not cut people off forever. She believed I had put her in an impossible position. She believed 16 was old enough for Sophie to have some control over her relationships. Some of those points were not ridiculous. That was what made this harder than if my mother had simply said, "I don't care what you want." She cared deeply. She just believed caring gave her authority. Jonah said something one night when I was rereading one of her messages. "You're still trying to decide if her motive cancels out the method." I put my phone down. "That's not what I'm doing." "It kind of is." I gave him a look. He shrugged. "You don't have to decide she's evil. You just have to decide whether you trust her with the same access." That became the question I used from then on. Not, did Mom mean well? Not, was I perfectly right about Jenna? Not, did Sophie miss her? Did I trust my mother to have private access to my daughter without creating secrecy if she disagreed with me? At that point the answer was no. The Friday routine was still the hardest part. For the first month, Sophie was noticeably quieter on Fridays. Sometimes she called my mother. Sometimes she made plans with friends. Sometimes she just stayed home and complained that the house was boring. Once, after a particularly tense week, I almost told her, "You can go to Grandma's this Friday, just this once." The urge came from wanting everything to feel normal again. Jonah stopped me. Not by forbidding it. He just asked, "What changed?" I knew what he meant. Had my mother apologized? Had she demonstrated anything different? Had we rebuilt trust? "No," I said. "Nothing." He nodded. "We can revisit it later. We don't have to pretend nothing happened just because this part sucks." So we didn't. About 6 weeks after the meeting, my father called. He didn't start with my mother. He said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. "I knew enough to know you probably didn't know." That was already more honest than his earlier, "I thought you knew." He continued, "I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to argue with your mother. And I told myself staying out of it wasn't taking a side." I said, "But it was." "Yeah." Another pause. "I should have told her if she wanted Jenna there, she needed to tell you. I should have told you when I saw it happening. I didn't." I appreciated that he didn't add, "But." I told him that. He said, "I have a bad habit of thinking if I don't say anything, I can't be blamed for what happens next." That was probably the most self-aware thing my father had ever said about family conflict. We started slowly. He met Sophie for lunch one Saturday, just the two of them. He asked me first. He didn't use Sophie to ask about my mother. He didn't bring up Jenna. He didn't test the boundary. The next week he took Sophie to practice and brought her home exactly when he said he would. Then again. Trust came back in boring pieces. That was what made it feel real. My mother took longer. For almost 2 months she would apologize for the consequences instead of the behavior. I'm sorry this has all hurt Sophie. I'm sorry things got so out of hand. I'm sorry you felt undermined. I kept telling her the same thing. I need you to be specific. She hated that. She said I wanted humiliation. I said I wanted to know she understood the behavior that couldn't happen again. At one point she said, I guess I should have told you Jenna stopped by. I answered, you arranged some of the meetings. She didn't respond for 3 days. Then she sent, you're right that I arranged some of them. I told myself it was different because Sophie wanted to see her. I also told Sophie not to bring it up because I knew you would stop the visits. That put her in a position she shouldn't have been in. I still think you were too hard on Jenna, but I should have dealt with you instead of going around you. It was not a perfect apology. The sentence about Jenna still irritated me. But it was specific. More importantly, it named the actual choice she had made. I showed it to Jonah. He read it twice. That's more than I expected. Same. We didn't restore Fridays. Instead, we invited my parents over for dinner. Then we had lunch together the next week. Then my mother came to one of Sophie's school events and left with my father afterward instead of turning it into an opportunity to negotiate alone time. For a while, visits happened with either me or Jonah present. My mother didn't like it. She said once, I feel like I'm being supervised. I said, you are. She glared at me. I didn't soften it. That was another change. Before I would have said, that's not how I mean it, because I hated making someone feel ashamed. But it was exactly how I meant it. Not forever necessarily. For now. She had misused privacy, so privacy wasn't automatic anymore. Extended family stayed mixed. One cousin thought I was overreacting because Sophie was 16, not a little kid. My aunt thought my mother had been wrong but still believed I should have reconciled with Jenna sooner. Another relative told me privately that the secrecy was what bothered her most. I stopped trying to keep score. I corrected factual lies when they reached me. I did not recruit people. Jenna sent 2 more emails. I answered neither. The first said I was using my parents to punish her. The second was longer and angrier. She said Sophie needed adults who respected her autonomy. She said I was teaching Sophie that love was conditional on obedience. Some of that stung because there were pieces I could argue with myself. Had I been too controlling sometimes? Probably. Had I treated Sophie like a younger child during the original fight? Maybe. Had I been too quick to make no contact the only path after Jenna broke the temporary rule? Possibly. But Jenna still had not said, I should not have taken your 14-year-old daughter away without telling you and encouraged her to ignore your calls. She still framed the entire situation as evidence that my parenting was the real problem. So the no contact stayed. What surprised me was that Sophie's own feelings about Jenna became more complicated once the secrecy stopped. For months, I had assumed Sophie would be the one pushing hardest to see her. Instead, she pulled back. One evening she said, Aunt Jenna emailed me. I looked up. What did she say? That she misses me. How do you feel about that? I miss her too. I waited. Sophie added, but she also asked if you still talk about her. I sighed. Sophie said, that's what I mean. She always wants to know what you think. Did you answer? No. Do you want help answering? No. Okay. She gave me a look. I laughed. Sorry. Then she smiled a little. I just don't want to be the source anymore. That word source sounded older than 16. A few months after the birthday dinner, we had another family visit at our house. Nothing dramatic. My mother brought soup. My dad fixed a loose cabinet hinge without being asked. Sophie showed them a video from school. Jonah disappeared for 10 minutes to deal with something in the garage. It almost felt normal. Then my mother asked Sophie casually, have you heard from Jenna lately? Sophie's shoulders tightened. I saw it immediately. Before, I might have waited to see how Sophie handled it. Instead, I said, Mom. My mother looked at me. If you have a question about Jenna, ask me. I was asking Sophie. I know. I wasn't asking anything inappropriate. Then asking me shouldn't be a problem. My mother pressed her lips together. My father stared at the cabinet hinge. For 1 second I thought we were about to replay the entire conflict in miniature. Then my mother said, "Fine." She turned to me. "Has Jenna contacted you?" "Yes." "Are you answering?" "No." My mother nodded. That was it. No secret follow-up with Sophie later. At least none Sophie reported. No speech about family. No attempt to get around me. It wasn't warm. It was progress. After my parents left, Sophie helped me carry glasses into the kitchen. She was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Can I just not be in the middle anymore?" I put the glass I was holding in the sink. "Yes." She looked at me like she wanted to make sure I understood what she meant. No messages. No telling Grandma what Jenna says. No telling Jenna what you say. No being the reason everybody sees each other. "Yes," I said. "That's the point." If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.